Tonight on Primetime Politics, checked out.
It's going to exclude some of the most vulnerable. That is wrong. The Liberals need to fix this.
After declaring victory for a GST holiday, the NDP leader is now expressing outrage at the Liberal Party's latest affordability measure, calling on the Trudeau government to include seniors and other groups currently excluded from a plan for $250 checks. We'll debate the merits of what is on the table with members of Parliament. And
we have to do more, and we are doing more.
Being defensive about defense. The Prime Minister addresses criticisms that Canada is not spending enough. Coming up, we will hear from Bill Blair, the Defense Minister, about Canada's plan to ramp up investments and address the outrage of our closest allies. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Many MPs have been getting an earful from constituents this weekend. Many seniors and those on social assistance upset they will not qualify for the government's latest inflation relief effort. In particular, the $250 checks the government is promising most Canadians to be received in the early spring. Now, it is the second piece to a two-part promise, the other being a so-called GST holiday, which would apply on many goods and be available to everyone if passed by mid-December. The NDP leader spoke about the $250 checks earlier today. Here's what we heard from Jagmeet Singh.
The Liberals caved to our demand. Well, we learned on Friday that the checks are being excluded from some of the most vulnerable Canadians, from seniors, from people living with disabilities, and from students. It is a slap in the face. We could pass the GST holiday this week, give people a break right away, and the Liberals have to fix their mess. They have to fix the checks.
Well, joining us now is the Deputy Government House Leader, Mark Gerretsen, Conservative House Leader, Andrew Scheer, and NDP House Leader, Peter Julian. Hello to the three of you.
Hello.
Listen, Mr. Julian, I'm going to get you to start because we just heard your leader from earlier this afternoon expressing anger that seniors, those who have not worked in the past year, will not receive the $250 check in the spring. But, you know, he was the first to declare an NDP victory last week, sending out a press release even before the government did on this affordability plan. Should he have waited if he's not happy today?
Well, first off, the GST provisions we support, and it was the GST provisions that we were saying, look, we forced the government yet again to do something good for Canadians, whether we're talking about dental care, pharmacare, anti-scab legislation, affordable housing investments, the red dress alert, and so on. I mean, the NDP in this Parliament has made the difference for so many people across the country. But the provisions of the rebate, the $250, the briefings talked about going to everybody, including seniors and students and people with disabilities. And then we get the bill on Friday morning, and it turns out that is not the case. So we immediately got up. I got up in Parliament an hour later to say this is unacceptable. Today we've had the Conservatives and the Bloc joining in as well. But the reality is it was dumb of the government to basically push aside seniors, students, and people with disabilities, and we want to see that rectified.
Mr. Gerretsen, you know, let's talk a bit more about that then, because here you have Canadians in seniors who are living on fixed incomes. Do they not deserve, and others who haven't worked in the last year, do they not deserve to get a portion of this help?
Well, let's remember that everybody will get the GST break, the first part of this. As it relates to the second part, the workers' rebate, many seniors, I think there's close to 1 million seniors that currently work, will receive this. There are many people, I know at least in my community, many people in the disabled community that work as well. They will receive this as well. But let's, not shy away from the fact that no government has done more for seniors in terms of bringing in new initiatives than we have in the last 9 years. When we took office, we had just left a Stephen Harper government that Pierre Poilievre was part of that told seniors, you have to work for 2 years longer before you can retire. We immediately reversed that. We increased OAS. We increased the GIS. We even our signature programs like dental care and pharmacare, seniors were on the top of the list. We made sure that seniors were the ones that were going to receive that care first before anybody else. So, I mean, there's been so many initiatives that this government has brought forward for seniors, and we'll continue to talk to seniors.
Are you worried about the political price, though? I hear hear what you're saying, that you, as a government, you feel that you've done already a lot already, but do you feel about that you might get some backlash for not including them in this program?
Well, I mean, people can always voice their concerns. I mean, we don't look at things sort of what's the political angle to this as much as what is good policy for Canadians. And we believe that, the policy that we introduced is good, and it will benefit Canadians and it will benefit seniors as well. I mean, the big chunk of this is the GST, the holiday on the GST. Everybody is going to benefit from that, and people are going to save a lot of money. It's also going to benefit. It's also going to benefit a lot of businesses, small businesses. I can think of countless restaurants in my area that are typically really slow during January and February that are going to see increased traffic. And when we have an economy that is doing better for everybody, that's a benefit to the country as a whole.
Mr. Scheer, last week your leader would not say whether or not the Conservatives would actually support this GST holiday plus this $250 check. Can you say now whether or not your party will be supporting this?
Sure, but first let me just address a couple of things. Nobody has done more to hurt seniors than this Liberal government. Seniors face the toughest challenge when it comes to the inflationary policies that Justin Trudeau has imposed on Canadians. When you're on a fixed income and prices start going through the roof because of Trudeau's inflation, it's very hard for seniors to make that up. Many of them have to re-enter into the workforce. Their pensions don't keep up with the inflation that Trudeau caused with his massive deficits and money printing. And the NDP support the quadrupling of the carbon tax. So when Mr. Julian talks about making life more affordable, it's not what his voting record shows when he votes time and time again to defend the Trudeau carbon tax, which does increase the cost of living very dramatically. So we have to see what's actually in the bill. They haven't tabled the bill in Parliament yet, and we've seen what they've done in the past. They've had to make corrections to their small business and middle class tax hike with the capital gains, where they had to come in and do almost a complete rewrite for whole components of it. So when they're actually ready to put before Parliament what they're going to do, we'll take a look at it. But I have to also point out that what they're talking about is a temporary 2-month trick right before they hike the carbon tax again. Right about just a few weeks after this temporary measure expires, they're going to jack up the carbon tax yet again. So I don't think Canadians are going to be fooled by saving a few cents on a bag of chips. If you look at the list of things they're doing this for, it's jigsaw puzzles for all ages, but board games just for children, and cheese curls and cheese puffs it's off of, and brittle pretzels. So, we're going through some of these things, trying to figure out exactly what their logic was behind this. But, costumes,
then I guess you can vote against
costumes 2 weeks after Halloween's over, and taking the GST off of Christmas trees after most families have already bought their trees and decorated them. So, when they're ready to table it before Parliament, we'll take a look at it. But I should also point out, Justin Trudeau himself admitted that every dollar he spends like this increases inflation. So what we're concerned about is that all the temporary benefits that Canadians might see will just get sucked away with that giant shop vac of inflation that Justin Trudeau admitted all this deficit spending.
Mr. Scheer, let me just jump in before we lose time here, because I do want to pick up on what we're hearing from Mr. Scheer, Mr. Gerretsen, because we have heard from the business community. They think in broad strokes the GST portion will increase spending, but they also believe that increase in spending will essentially send a message to the Bank of Canada not to cut its bank rate so aggressively. If the issue here is affordability, why not let the bank continue its path as opposed to pursuing this type of, because it was just a few days ago where the Prime Minister did say it is inflationary to give out money like this.
Okay, so 2 things. I just want to correct the record on one thing. If you believe the argument that Mr. Scheer just put forward, that means that you believe the notion that Justin Trudeau has caused the inflation that we've seen. Yes. This is inflation that is global, so I guess he can control global inflation. This is global inflation. Well, we've had the lowest inflation.
Mr. Gerretsen, speak, please.
It's the lowest inflation. We've had the lowest inflation in the G7.
Let Mr. Gerretsen speak, please.
We've had the lowest inflation in the G7. We've seen the the best outcome coming out of it with the softest landing of in the G7. The reality is that the world faced inflation following a war in Ukraine, following a pandemic.
But does this policy push pressure on inflation and also tell the Bank of Canada, wait, don't cut so aggressively right now?
When you invest in the people that need it the most and you give them the resources that they need to spend, you are not contributing to inflation the same way that you would if you're giving it to people that don't need it. That's just a reality. When you put money into the hands of the people that really need it so that they can spend it in the economy, it will keep our economy going and it will give them the supports and the resources that they need.
Mr. Julian, what do you say to that?
Well, first off, I mean, what we're talking about is the GST coming off of essentials. That's certainly what Jagmeet Singh and the NDP have been presenting, including home heating and cell phone the bills. I mean, the reality is that's an essential in today's environment. And of course, children's clothing. Some of those things are covered by the Liberal proposal. And certainly what this means is that Canadians will be a little less in debt over the Christmas season. Because of that, they will be spending. That's why we support it. It's not the NDP's approach. I mean, the NDP approach would be that it's permanent. And it's over all of the essentials, or it's taken off all of the essentials. But the flip-flop in Pierre Poilievre, I mean, in 1 minute he's saying axe taxes, and the other he's saying, okay, no, we don't know about how we're going to vote on this. And this is where I think the inconsistency of the Conservatives, changing their message every week and contradicting themselves constantly, undermines their own credibility. Now, as far as the check is concerned, though, the $250, it needs to go to people who are most desperate in terms of putting food on the table and keeping a roof over their head.
Any concerns about inflation, though?
People with disabilities.
Any concerns about inflation,
well, no,
though, Mr.
these are
Julian?
folks who are going into debt. They're scrimping and saving in order to survive. And the reality is, what this does is allow them to put food on the table. These are the kinds of measures that we want to see. That's why we want to see it as a permanent GST reduction. I mean, the GST was imposed on us by the Conservatives, and the reality is it's regressive taxation. It hurts those who are the lowest income. Now, what we have is an income tax system under Stephen Harper that gives $30 billion a year to the wealthiest, the billionaires, the wealthiest corporations. They can take it to their offshore tax havens, as the PBO has indicated, and that's something that really needs to be taken a look at so that we can have a more balanced income tax system. But the reality is, when it comes to regressive taxes like the GST imposed on us by the Conservatives, having that relief will make a difference. Having a $250 check this winter going to a senior, a person with a disability, or a student can make a difference too, and that's what the NDP is pushing for.
Okay, I'm quickly losing time, but I need to ask this very quickly, because in order to get this proposal passed, part one, part two, the deadlock over parliamentary privilege will have to be suspended for a time. How do you feel about that, Mr. Scheer?
Well, look, Justin Trudeau has to decide when he wants to comply with a lawful order of Parliament to produce documents in the $400 million scandal where Liberal insiders were funneling money into their own companies. He refuses to do that. That is his choice. But I just have to once again go back. Inflation is not a global phenomenon. If it's happening in other countries, it means that they did the same stupid things that the Trudeau government did. Justin Trudeau forced the Bank of Canada to print billions of dollars out of thin air, and that is what caused inflation. Nothing going on in Ukraine affects the Canadian housing market, affects the Canadian...
Okay, I'm jumping in about essentially suspending the parliamentary privilege. Mr. Julian, if you're willing to do it with this, why not work with the Liberals, get this impasse done, and get Parliament back to work?
We've said we're willing to do this because time is of the essence in making sure that people actually can take advantage of the GST being reduced, and hopefully also these checks going to people who are really in need across the country.
But in terms of getting Parliament back to work, are there not other priorities that have to happen?
We said the Conservatives should stop filibustering their own motion, but the Liberals have to provide the documents. This is something that Parliament directed the Liberal government to do, and they should respect that.
Okay, Mr. Gerretsen, last minute to you, last 40 seconds to you. What do you have to say about this?
Approximately 190 people have spoken to the motion that the Conservatives put forward, of which over 170 were Conservatives. I think they've talked enough about this particular issue, and it's time that we vote on their motion so that we can get back to doing the business of Canadians.
A Liberal MP just spoke to it today.
Okay, Mark Gerretsen, Andrew Scheer, Peter Julian, you three keep me on my toes. Thank you very much for this Monday.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. Well, time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. Small businesses in Canada will get a carbon tax rebate sooner than expected. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland announcing this afternoon small businesses will begin seeing tax-free rebates deposited today, which is about 3 weeks ahead of schedule.
So these are going to be significant payments to small businesses across the country.
The government says it will deliver over $2.5 billion in rebates to over 600,000 businesses. The money coming from fuel charges from the last 5 years.
Femicide and intimate partner violence must be treated like the epidemics that they are. And the government and all federal party leaders must act quickly to bring these measures into force and ensure their permanent and enduring enforcement.
While you're listening to the National Association of Women in the Law, the group this morning calling on Ottawa to quickly implement gun control measures to protect domestic violence victims. Parts of the government's Bill C-21 would make it more difficult for people convicted of domestic violence offenses to possess a firearm. The group says those measures have not yet been implemented despite the bill becoming law nearly a year ago. The call comes on the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. And finally, U.S. Special Counsel Jack Smith is dropping the federal cases against President-elect Donald Trump. Smith making the request in a court filing today. Trump had originally been indicted on numerous charges for attempting to overturn the 2020 election and allegedly mishandling classified documents. But there is a long-standing Department of Justice policy in the U.S. that says a sitting president cannot face prosecution. Well, to Montreal now, where the Prime Minister earlier this morning defended his government's spending in defence. Canada, just one of 8 NATO countries that is failing to meet the alliance's 2% of GDP contribution. But Justin Trudeau says his government has been moving to bump up that number since first being elected.
When my progressive Liberal government took office in 2015, the previous Conservative government had dropped investments in defense to below 1% of our GDP. They were very good with photo ops and waving the flags. They were not so good in making necessary investments. We've made sure that our investments are as concrete as possible and contributing to the capacity of Canadians to continue to be involved and leading in so many different NATO aspects. We have to do more, and we are doing more.
Now, the Trudeau Liberals have been forced to address their defense investments in recent days as 2 U.S. politicians singled out Canada for being laggards within NATO commitments. One comment made in Montreal at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, where the Prime Minister was today. The other made at the Halifax International Security Forum, where I talked to the Defense Minister about the criticisms. Minister, thank you for the time.
Always a pleasure, Michael.
Listen, I want to begin with Mike Turner, U.S. representative who is, as you know, in Montreal right now, taking part in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And in Montreal, he made some fairly disparaging comments about the Prime Minister, describing the Prime Minister's defense decisions and policies as an example of arrogance. And he also went on to say that countries that don't meet NATO commitments should be facing consequences. I'm wondering what your reaction to that is, and whether or not Canada has essentially alienated our closest ally by taking too long to invest in defense.
I would like not to put too much stock. I don't know that individual, and everybody's entitled to an opinion. But I've been engaged with the United States for a very long time. We work very closely with the current administration, and the Secretary of Defense is a friend and a colleague that we've been working on. And here in Halifax, I've had the opportunity to meet with a very senior delegation of congressional representatives from the United States and very senior senators. We've been able to have very good and frank conversations, and they're also expressing concern about Canada's burden sharing in both continental defense between Canada and the United States and in fulfillment of our other obligations to NATO and in the Indo-Pacific. I've been able to assure them directly. Canada understands its obligations. We have made a commitment to meet the spending threshold and the commitment of NATO, but even beyond that, the conversation has to go beyond just a conversation about how much money needs to be spent. They're pushing on an open door. The answer is yes, we know how much we've got to spend. But the conversation now has to evolve into what are we spending it on? What capabilities do we have to acquire? How do we make sure that we do that in an alignment with our closest allies? That work is taking place, and I would invite that representative, to take a look at the work we're doing, for example, in NORAD modernization. It's an enormous commitment of both our countries, the United States and Canada, together to work collaboratively, to invest in new technologies, to create new capabilities that are absolutely essential in the defense of our continent. There's also, I think, an important acknowledgement that much of the work that we have to do in defense requires the acquisition of capabilities for which we have to work with the United States. I've been meeting with congressional leaders here and with the existing administration. I anticipate I'll be meeting with the incoming administration on how we can work better together to get that job done. Canada understands the need to invest in defense. Canadians understand the need to invest in defense. We are going to do that, but we want to make sure that we get good value for those investments.
Making sure you get value, trying to decide where the dollars go to. So I'm wondering what your behind-the-door conversations were like with Senator Tim Reich, because here he is in Halifax saying to an open plenary that Donald Trump would find it laughable, would guffaw at the timeline this country has set for meeting the NATO targets. Well, did you respond to that to him in any way?
Senator Reich is frankly, he's somebody that we worked with for a very long time. He understands Canada's relationship with the United States. He's a border senator himself. He understands the value of that relationship. I took from the senator's remarks that he was just trying to continue to encourage us to do what is required, and I was able to assure him we've heard that. I came before this forum last year, and I made a very conscious decision to speak to our American friends and all of our international partners and to Canadians in acknowledging we needed to do more, that we needed to spend more, we needed to acquire new capabilities. We've come forward with our new defense policy, our spring budget. We came forward with a plan with timelines. Those timelines are predicated on how long it takes to build the ships and the submarines, to buy and acquire the planes, to train personnel to be sailors and marine techs and pilots and aircraft maintenance crews. All of that work takes time and investment of large numbers of dollars. I've asked and I want to accelerate that. We want to deliver on that faster because the world that we're living in requires that we be ready sooner. So I've gone to our allies, and particularly the United States, and work with me, help us here. I want to work with industry as well, and I've had a number of meetings, with large and small military industrial industries. How can we do business better together to deliver on those promises? So
do you have a sense that the timelines will be shortened, the fact that you can deliver faster than the deadline originally set by your policy?
I think with the help of industry, with the help of our American partners who are our closest ally, even with the help of other international partners such as Germany and Norway and Korea and Sweden, we've been having conversations with those countries and with their industries. We know that we have a strong sense of urgency on what needs to be done. We think it can be done better, more efficiently, and produce a better result for Canadians and our national defense by doing it more collaboratively. I believe that the current world environment demands that we accelerate the delivery of those capabilities as quickly as possible, and I believe there's real opportunity to do that. Frankly, I think it's important to think of the dollars that Canada will invest in our national defense and in global security. Creates a real opportunity for us to build stronger partnerships with industry, stronger partnerships with our allies, and demonstrate, as Canada always has, that we are committed to those alliances, and Canada always steps up to do its part.
I've been listening to you throughout this weekend here in Halifax, and it is clear that you have a sense of urgency about trying to deliver your Arctic strategy on equipment. Is that urgency, that sense of it, shared by your government, though? Is that shared by the Prime Minister?
Yes, it is. And it's shared certainly with my Prime Minister, certainly with my government, but most importantly, I think it's now becoming increasingly shared by Canadians who understand the environment, understand this responsibility, and I've been very encouraged by the strong support we're receiving right across this country. And it's not political. It's bipartisan. It's more of a national consensus that we need to do more. I want to be really clear. The need to spend more is not in response to the critics. Frankly, there are always critics. It's in response to our national interest, the investment that we need to make in our security is directly tied to our future prosperity. And so I have to feel a sense of urgency because the world is changing and we are responding to that new environment. But it's also because I want to be able to assure our future prosperity. So these are investments in Canada's future. I think Canadians understand that, and I believe there's a strong consensus in this country. It's the right thing to do, and we're going to put our head down and get it done.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you use the word nonpartisan because, you know, I think about the timeline. Whenever it may be, within the calendar year, there will be an election. Earlier, sooner, later, don't know. Who will be in government, we don't know. But how do you ensure that the policies that you put into place today, the priorities that you put in place today for national defense actually has legacy beyond the year that remains for your government?
Well, and first of all, for my government, we are absolutely and unwaveringly committed to getting this job done. But it's one of the reasons that I've tried very hard over the last year and a half to have a conversation with Canadians, have a conversations with our allies, even open us up to a certain amount of criticism, because the critics will always rise to the bait. When you say you need to do better, out they come. But the conversation, the important conversation, was with Canadians. It was with them talking not just about the need to spend more money, but what we needed to spend it on and why. In our defense policy update that we released in April, we've tried to tell Canada's story. We tried to talk about our responsibility to our country, to our continent, to our north, to the Arctic, to the people that live there, to all Canadians. I believe that story has resonated with Canadians, and I believe that there's a growing appreciation for the need to do more. And that's the thing that gives me hope and confidence for the future. Because no future government can ignore the overwhelming consensus and will of Canadian people. And so if Canadians think this is the right thing to do, any future government, mine or another, will have to deliver on what Canadians require of us.
Mr. Bill Blair, thank you.
Always a problem, but thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Now, we did speak to many people at the Halifax International Security Forum, and coming up tomorrow, we'll share with you our conversation with U.S. Senator Tim Kaine. Arguably best known as Hillary Clinton's running mate, he currently sits on both the U.S. Senate's Defense and Foreign Affairs committees. Here's a bit of what Tim Kaine had to say to us about Canada's defense spending.
A number of years ago, only 3 of the NATO nations were meeting their 2% of their GDP into defense spending. President Trump, when he was president, really pushed that. And then, frankly, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has also been a moment of clarity. And so now we're well into the mid-20s in nations that are meeting their 2%. Canada is not yet there, but we heard loud and clear from the defense minister that we're going to get there. And the commitment that was made by the Prime Minister and others is Canada would be there by 2032, but even sooner if some things happen. And we had very candid discussions with the Defense Minister about, for example, if our acquisition processes, either in Canada or in the United States, are very slow, it's hard to get to the 2% level soon if everything that you're ordering is going to be delivered 4 or 5 years from now.
And again, that was U.S. Senator Tim Kaine. You can hear the full interview tomorrow right here on Primetime Politics. And if you want to watch what happened at the Halifax International Security Forum, you can stream the plenary sessions and the news conferences on our website, cpac.ca. And that is our program for this Monday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow night. Until then, take care.